Hey, it's Paul Vance with GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking to men and dads about modern fatherhood. And the last couple episodes, we have talked a little bit about trauma, and I have a trauma expert on the show today, Michael Unbroken. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, man. Excited to be here, Paul.
So you've got a podcast. You've been working as a coach with people who've experienced childhood trauma. So you've got a lot of background, a lot of hands-on background of what you've seen. And I guess I'm just really curious about how trauma manifests itself, because we hear about trauma, really bad trauma in some of your story. I don't know if you want to get into some of your story, but it sounds like really rough, hard trauma. And anybody could imagine being, traumatized, having a lifelong effect of that. And then other people have what might be considered smaller traumas that that somebody else might evaluate as small, yet they're very affected by it. So could you talk a little bit about what trauma is and how it affects different people?
Yeah, and of course I'll give you a little background here. I'll give you the short version. But I grew up in Indianapolis, child of drug addict, alcoholic parents. In fact, my mother cut off my right index finger when I was just 4 years old. My stepdad, super abusive. I mean, this dude was 6'4", 220, beating up a 7-year-old, put me in the hospital. I mean, a real coward. Most of my childhood, we were homeless and deeply in poverty. I lived with between like 25 to 30 different families, between 8 to 12. And when I was 12, I got adopted, which in a lot of ways was a godsend, except it was by my racist grandmother, and I happened to be biracial. So you toss that into the pile, and here we go. And I think what happened is, like a lot of people who experience that level of trauma, I just wanted to escape reality.
Yeah, I'm
And
sure.
so at 12 years old, I started doing drugs. At 13, I started drinking. I got expelled from school twice, once for selling drugs, I got caught, and then once for fighting. And when I was like 18 years old, I got fired from this warehouse job where I was just putting microchips and motherboards all day long. And I'm sitting in my car and I'm like, what's the solution for all of this? And Paul, my thought was money. And so I made a declaration to myself, I want to make 100 grand a year legally by the
Wow.
time I'm 21, which was super important because I have family in prison for life. I've been in handcuffs more times than I can count. And my three childhood best friends have been murdered. And so, like, I knew the path that I was going down. Like, I'm dead or in jail if I don't change something. Sure enough, land a job with a Fortune 10 company with no high school diploma, no college education. By the time I'm 26, I make almost $1 million, right? But I'm 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs a day, drinking myself to sleep. I'm high from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. I'm cheating on my girlfriend. Car gets repoed. I'm $50,000 in debt, making 200 grand a year. And my little brother tells me never talk to me again. That's the impact of trauma, right? And I hit this massive rock bottom moment. And I kind of just was just tired of my own shit, man. And I was like, this is your fault. Do something about it. And we can get into that later if we want. But ultimately, fast forward 14 years later, here I am getting to serve and be of service. And the thing about trauma that people don't particularly understand is that it's not always the big things. Now, of course, I just
Yeah.
labeled out a couple of big things that were my experience, but it's subjective. Dude, your third grade teacher laughing at you inadvertently because you colored the moon purple, and this is a very innocent thing, and the whole classroom laughs at you, can scar you for
Yeah,
life
sure.
because the brain is taking in all this data to understand and create survival based on its environment. And, if you get laughed at, you're ostracized by the community. If you're ostracized by the community, you go in the wilderness, you're in the wilderness, you die. Right. And so, like, it's very biological. And people don't understand that even those little things can be these massive problematic experiences waiting to unfold 25 years down the road. That's why when you look at, the guy who can't step up to the board meeting, well, the guy who won't have confrontation, right? The guy who his wife belittles him all the time, it's because he's so terrified to step into his agency, his sovereignty, right? And it's all because of Miss Smith, who that moment meant nothing to her and
Right.
everything to him.
Yeah. So I guess you're saying that can be trauma, big and small. Is there any indicator of how people will react to that trauma that you can tell from your experience with all your clients that differentiates them?
Well, I mean, it's patterns, right? And if you look at humans, we are all pattern making machines. Like at the end of the day, it's always input output. And so when I see people who may have a certain response, like especially when I'm coaching people in whether it's my group programs or one-on-one, the thing that I'm always thinking about is like, where does the pattern for this exist? A great example is I was working with a client recently, and his problem was that he constantly overwhelmed himself with everything in the moments in which his life was good. Now,
Mm,
what does that mean, Paul? Well, that's a pattern. When he was a child and he had the opportunity to just exist, there was pressure on him to succeed, to be perfect, to do all the things, to be the valedictorian and the captain of the football team, all these things that he was. And because of that, what started to transpire is that every time his life was good and peaceful, right, he would stack and stack and stack and create this pressure and this chaos because that was his emotional home. And so what started to transpire is that the more that he was in this space of trying to navigate a peaceful life, he subconsciously would find ways to add all of this back-breaking pressure to himself that forced him into this corner to be a quote unquote high performer. And because of that, the thing that happened is that his life started to become a disaster because in childhood, the pressure from his parents to be great took away his identity, and he wasn't able to ever figure out who he was on his own. And so here he is, he's married, he has kids, he's a high performer running a company that we've all heard of, by the way. And in this moment, he's like, I'm breaking down, I cannot handle this, there's so much pressure. And you know what we got to, Paul? This is what's so incredible. You talked about like, how do people react? Some people under pressure, they thrive. And I always tell my clients, I'm like, if you tell me you thrive in chaos, I'm going to smack you in the face because that doesn't make sense, right? You shouldn't always thrive in chaos. Now, does it make sense at times? Of course, because life is going to life. But it's like the peace of life is in the pause. It's in the space where you get to evaluate and make sense of what's happening. You can take the data and make meaning of it and compartmentalize and move about life. And so he's in this position where he's trying to be this high performer. He's having multiple panic attacks a day. He
mm.
is failing in his relationship. His kids have stopped talking to him. He gained a bunch of weight. And what it really came down to, Paul, this is mind blowing for him. But I saw it because I understand patterns. The thing that it was, he was terrified to ask for help. And so the whole time that he's trying to build this big, giant, grandiose life, when things get hard, instead of asking for help, he puts more on his plate because he's terrified of the idea that somebody might think he's weak. Because when he was a kid, and this is what we got to, because when he was a kid, his dad told him that men don't ask for help.
Yeah, right, right, right. So but what is the difference between the people? I mean, sometimes you hear about people who really surmount these traumas and they ostensibly lead happy lives. You think that's always a ruse, that it's always just a front, that when they've suffered all this trauma, they've never really encountered it or worked through it, that success is not really a real, like a real success. I mean, maybe a monetary success, but it's not the success they were looking for.
Yeah, look, at 25, you would look at my life on paper and be like, this guy's really got it, right?
Right.
Couple $100,000 a year, working for a Fortune 10 company, smoking hot girlfriend, $80,000 car, best apartment in the city, $500 dinners every week. And yet I'm 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs a day, drinking myself to sleep, and my brothers won't talk to me. Are there people who have had traumatic experiences who have seemingly normal, healthy lives? Yeah, of course. I'm one of them. Like, my life's great. I mean, obviously, you don't become the trauma coach because you had a good trauma childhood, right? But like, the thing that I'm always thinking about is like, we are so independent as people. Like, even though there are patterns and even though there are these things that you can see and recognize in the world, like it impacts everyone so differently because
Right.
this, I like, if you look at my life, I become a high performer even though I had arguably one of the worst childhoods you can imagine. I mean, I look at my hand every day and I look at the finger my mom cut off. Like,
Yeah.
that carries weight. And for some people, just the smallest experience cripples them. And so they chase success. But then, Paul, I think about this. There are these three main areas of life: health, wealth, relationships. I can bucket pretty much anything about our human experience into those. And the thing that I find, especially when I work with guys, by the way, is that they'll thrive in one, but not all three.
Interesting.
So they'll have great wealth, but their health and their relationship sucks. Or they'll have a great relationship, but their health and their wealth sucks. Or they have great health, but their relationship and their wealth sucks. And so it's very rare and this is my experience only, right, that you see somebody who had traumatic experience who's thriving in all three of those areas who have not done
Right.
massive work, right? And so can I say either way, yes or no? Not really, because it's so subjective to each individual's human experience. But what I will say, and I'll say this with certainty, that whether I work with somebody who's this high performer executive, or, I mean, I literally have worked with people who like drive semi trucks, or they're teachers, or they're artists. The one thing all these people have in common is that they've recognized that their life isn't what they want it to be.
Yeah, so is that a marker of the like a starting awareness of the fact that you had this trauma and that you need to do something about it, that you have this realization, however you get to it, that your life is not on the track you want it to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, I think that you have to be willing to acknowledge the reality of the life that you're living, right? A lot.
Well, maybe that good question is like, what do most people come to you? When is the light bulb go off where they say, I need to talk to Michael and talk to him about coaching?
Yeah, when they're on the edge, man. Like when they've tried therapy and it doesn't work, and they've read the
Yeah.
books and listened to the podcast, they're ready to take their own life. They're completely in debt. They're overweight. They're trapped in these ideals. They don't have the relationship that they want. Life has just overwhelmed them with chaos. And they come to me and they say, I'm willing to do anything. And I go, perfect. Now I can help you. Because Paul, I'll give you an example. I'm 29 years old. I am leaving the relationship that I was in. I'm still working through the debt. I have no money. I have no car. I pack what little bit of stuff I have. I leave my relationship. I drive across the country in a rental car with $500 in my pocket and no place to live, on my way to Portland, Oregon to work with this renowned therapist because I was willing to do anything. And if you're not in that place, like I can't really help you. Like you're either all in or you're all out.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the people that come to me, they're like, I'm willing. I will do what it takes to create the life that I want. I need leadership. I need guidance. And Paul, all I am, dude, is I'm just a step in front of them. That's all. I'm just a step. I already been down that tunnel. I can help you navigate the tripwires and the landmines, and I'm here to hold your hand and support you through it. But here's what's really difficult about that. You got to ask for help first. Because I didn't come knock on Paul's door and say, hey, man, let's get your life together. Right. But the people who they have begun to have awareness because their health, wealth, and their relationships are not working, they come to me. And then from there, we see what we can do.
Yeah. So maybe that is the first step you define as being broken and then having to become unbroken, like put yourself back together again.
Well, I think the first step is like simply acknowledging reality,
Yeah.
right? People live in fiction, dude.
Yeah.
I'm like, you are crazy. Whatever you think is reality, you are so removed from it. We need to get you connected again. And so I go down this journey with people. Before I coach them, I always have like a consultation with them, and I try to figure out if they're actually paying attention to their lives, right? Because there's levels to this, right? And if you've done zero work, I'm probably not your guy, right? Because there's so much you have to unravel, because coaching is so different than therapy, right? Coaching is about how do we change your life. I think therapy is about how do you understand your life.
Right.
And I think they parlay. They're both very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I would posit that maybe you have to do that first therapy work and dig back into the past so you fully
maybe
figure it out.
maybe here's what I always tell people. I would have gotten a coach before I got a therapist because I needed behavioral changes immediately.
Yeah.
Right. So it's subjective, but I think that you had to have some acknowledgement and reality checked in your own experience to come over here because I'm going to give it to you straight. And it might be a little too intense for some people at first, right? And that's a good thing because I want to have awakenings with people because you can't I mean, you can only change what you're paying attention to, right? And so broken, not broken, any of the things that we label people, it's also subjective. And at the end of the day, what it's really about when I look at people's human experience is I just want to connect with them. And I want them to know that they're not alone. And I want them to know that they're supported. And I want them to know that I've been down this path. But Paul, I'm going to tell you this because it's so important, man. I'm not here to coddle you. I'm not here to baby you. I'm going to tell you the truth. And for a lot of people, they don't want to hear it. And you play victim games, you win victim prizes. Okay. And so the thing is, if you want to be the hero of your own story, that's what Think Unbroken is. That's what we do. But you've got to acknowledge your journey and look at it and go, my life's not what I want it to be. And the hardest thing for anyone is telling the truth
To themselves or to others.
to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is the relationship between healing the trauma and building resilience? Because I run this program on building resilience, but it's usually for people who are not, post-traumatic, or at least they don't present the same way you're talking about. But is there a relationship, or how do they overlap?
I think everyone is resilient.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've made it this far, man, you've worked through some things. If you're listening to Paul's podcast right now, man, you've been through some stuff. You're trying to be a better dad, trying to be a great dad, right? You're trying to have this life. You're trying to do these things. Resilience is a part of the human experience. Paul, we are the apex predator. You don't become the apex predator without being resilient. Sharks aren't running the world, right? Even though some people may want to think that, right? Antelopes aren't running the world. Raccoons aren't running the world. We are. We are the apex. We are the most resilient and the most adaptable. And the thing that's really interesting about that is that there's a direct correlation, in my opinion, between the level of resiliency one has and the amount of trauma that they've experienced.
About that more. That's interesting.
Well, at 8 years old, I was homeless. There were moments where I'll give you an example. I grew up a Boy Scout, which is a weird experience while also growing up in the chaos of this. I was Cub Scout as a Boy Scout, and then I thought about being an Eagle Scout, but I like sports and girls way more. And so I ended up having my Cub Scout uniform at home. And my mom was always in and out of rehab. We never knew where she was going to be. And I always just kind of thought, like, even at a young age, like I got to get money somehow. And so I would go to the corner of 30th and Georgetown in Indianapolis at the Big Lots that's right there next to the Coke field, right by the Indianapolis 500. I would steal all of the candy bars I possibly could. I would put on my Boy Scout uniform and I'd go sell them door to door for $1 a piece with 100% profit margin. All right. I had to do what it takes. At 8 years old, I did that. That's insane. Couldn't imagine that, right? And as you get into life, like you have to be resilient. But the level of trauma, some kids grow up like me and they are on their own. Like people don't understand this. Some kids have been on their own since they were 8 years old. I had no childhood. My brothers had no childhood, right? We were out making it happen, trying to figure out how to navigate life alone, constantly in the world, getting in trouble, fucking shit up. Like there was like some good and some bad in there, but some people, resiliency doesn't come for them until much later in life, right? The first loss of a friend, maybe a pandemic, maybe they lose their job, maybe one of their parents dies. Some people have it like, I don't want to say good because it's subjective, right? But some people have had a very smooth experience until they don't.
Right.
And then they're tested. And here's what I think is interesting. When people have survived trauma, the tests are easy in adulthood. Bro, as an entrepreneur, Paul, like I'm not scared to lose anything. I already been home. I already had my car repoed. I already had no money. And then as an adult, what happens is now when you're tested, it's like, will you rise to the occasion? And there are people who do, and there are people who don't. And the people who don't, and this is my opinion, it's so unbelievably overwhelming that they don't know where to begin. And instead of asking for help and finding support, they go to coping mechanisms.
Sure. Sure. Well, some people crumble and some people do what you did when you first 18, 20. You tried to work your way out of it and fell into other traps. But there must have been something in you at 18. I mean, most kids growing up with your background wouldn't have immediately said, I'm going to aim for 100,000. They would have been happy to like, I'm going to aim for 20,000. I'm going to aim for just getting a job at McDonald's.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
why do you think that you reacted in a way that was more like, you're really going to grab the brass ring and try to really, I mean, it led to other problems clearly, but you had to be motivated to find very creative solutions to go from 0 to 100.
Well, and I went that path. I mean, my first like big boy job was I was a general manager in training at a fast food restaurant.
Okay.
At 18 and a half, I had 52 people under me, right? Leadership, doing P&Ls, ordering, inventory, shrink loss, all that stuff.
You must have
right?
made an impression. You must have had some basic
Well,
smarts and basic.
Well, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Presence.
I got the gift of gab in a lot of ways, right? But when I was young, one of the things that happened that it's exposure, Paul. This is the thing people don't talk about enough. In that space of 8 to 12, living with all those families, getting bounced around place to place, I was exposed to different dynamics.
Yeah.
And I'll never, ever forget this. So we get picked up. My brothers get taken someplace, I get taken someplace. It was just always like this, man. We never had a safe, stable home. And some of the houses were like mine, chaotic and disgusting and poor parenting and things I won't even get into. And sometimes they were the opposite. And one day I get picked up by this family. They're a member of the church. We go to their home. And first off, they have a really nice car. And it was clean, which was like shocking to me. And then they had a house that had 3 garages. And in one of the garages, they had a BMW. And the house was immaculate. It was gigantic. There were 5 bedrooms in it. They had a whole kitchen with food in the refrigerator. Nobody was yelling at each other. Nobody was cursing at each other. The wife wasn't getting hit by the dad. And I was like comfortable in that environment because it was so incredibly unknown.
Right.
And so I mentioned my rock bottom moment. I'll close the loop on this, but you need this context. So at 18 years old, I was like, I'm going to chase money because I think that I can have this life. Because the solution to me in my mind was money. That gets rid of poverty. That gets rid of homelessness. That gets rid of abuse based only on what I'd been exposed to.
Yeah.
But what I didn't know is that all of that money without clarity and a plan just fuels what you already are. And I was a maniac, right? And so my life was very much in chaos. And at 25, I had this rock bottom moment where I wake up one morning and I'm laying in bed, I'm smoking a joint, eating chocolate cake. Keep in mind, I'm 350 pounds and it's 10 o'clock in the morning and I'm watching the freaking CrossFit games. And it's like, bro, what are you doing? Right? Because I was living into what people told me. You're a loser. You suck. You don't matter. You're fat. You're dumb. You'll never amount to anything. I was living into everything everyone told me I would be. Okay. And so I had always been driven to want to be great, to want to be rich, to want to be able to like have a free life, but I kept sabotaging it. And that's what people do because they don't understand the emotion tied to the life experience and they haven't been able to navigate it. So the thing that drove me at 18 is still the thing that drives me today. But the difference between now and 20 years ago is that now I have clarity about the life I want. And it ain't about money, brother.
So we talked a little bit briefly. You're not a dad yourself, but you do work with a lot of fathers who are dealing with trauma in their past, whatever that size of that trauma is. And are there things that you would recommend to fathers who have that realization and want to be a better man, a better dad than their experience was?
Yeah, I think you need clarity. I think that so many people, and I would apply this to everything. And again, take this with a grain of salt. I'm not a dad, but I was once a kid, right?
Right.
And, there were certain things where it's like, if you bring that into the dynamic of your relationship with the children you're raising now, Does it create problems or solutions in your life? And I'm always asking myself questions, right? Because I think that the questions we ask ourselves are great markers and catalysts for the life that we get to create. And so I'd be asking myself questions like, does it benefit my relationship with my children for me to be emotionally closed off to them? Does it benefit my relationship with my children not to tell them I love them?
Mm.
Does it hurt my relationship with my children and my partner if I yell at my children or if I hit my children? Like, dude, some of the research around spanking's unbelievable. Like,
Yeah,
you should never hit a kid,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I think that a lot of it is like taking a really true assessment of the life that you have in this moment and thinking about the long tail possible consequences of your behaviors and actions,
yeah.
right? Like, I remember one of my, I won't say his name, but I grew up playing with a guy who went to the NFL, right? And we both grew up in the hood, and his dad was maniacal on the football practice field. Like, and I played for his dad. We both did for years and years. His dad would like embarrass him on the field and grab him by the helmet and throw him to the ground and like yell at him, not let him get water breaks and all of this. He does not talk to his dad anymore. I wonder why,
Right.
right? And I think that men are so afraid to be vulnerable and emotional. We've been told, don't cry, man up, don't be a bitch, which I mean, there's some truth to some of that, right? Like, don't be a bitch, like, man up, do your job, show up. But it's life is and.
Yeah.
I don't think life is either or. I think life is and. I think life is you, and this is me, like, I drive a big truck, I shoot guns, I do martial arts, and like I will cry with the right movie. You know what I'm saying? And it's like there's no reason why you can't be this peaceful warrior.
So I
What do you
imagine
think?
based on what you're saying earlier, by the time a dad gets to see you, they're ready to explode. But how about the dad who maybe has gone through some trauma that hasn't affected him or is not affecting him in that really blown up way and is still trying to deal with some hurt.
Yeah,
Maybe it's not the same experience you have, but it's hurt that is
sure.
affecting how he views what reality is and what parenting is, what fatherhood is, all the rest.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the conflict avoidant man, right? Grows up in a household with a father and mother who are always yelling, arguing, screaming, fighting.
Yeah.
And then as an adult dealing with his own children, he can't address conflict. He's passive. He bends at the will of his kids. Like, how many times do you see that guy? And you're
Permissive.
like, I'm like, you're going to let your kid talk to you like that, bro?
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
fucking crazy right now? But why? Because he's so conflict avoidant,
Yeah.
even with his own children, he won't even step into that.
Right. Right.
He's terrified of the ramification of what not being liked. And I always teach my clients, I'm go, your job as a parent isn't to be liked by your children. That's not your job. And look, again, not a dad. It's just the way I see the world. Your job as a parent is that you demand and command the respect of your household, right? And I think there's healthy and sustainable ways to do that. But if you've been conflict avoidant your whole life because you grew up watching a volatile household and you shrink at the first sign of anything outside of the norm, man, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And then you're going to build kids who are not resilient, who expect everything to be handed to them, and then they're going to run into people who are for real. Because, Paul, you know this, real life is real. There's some real shit outside these doors. And if you're building weak children because you are being a weak man, because you're afraid to address the thing that's in front of you, you are making a grave mistake.
I think a lot of our audience is dealing more with shades of gray than really obvious things like that. But sometimes the obvious thing that you can't see. You're right. But since you brought it up, I am curious because I've been doing a lot of thinking about this is how we define what masculine values are today. Since we hear so much about toxic masculinity, which it just seems to like put all men in just a horrible bucket.
Mhm.
But I think there are certain things that men do that are positive and that we should define and emulate and transmit, like the protector role that a lot of men feel. That's not a negative thing, that is
Yeah,
a
not at
super
all.
positive thing. Are there other ones that you would define as non-toxic masculine, and I hate that word, but things that are good about being a man that we should
Yeah, and I
about
think that I think this is important to say as a preface. Anything exploded under a microscope is going to look bad, right? You know,
Right.
you could have the woman who's a baker and all she does is bake, and that's toxic, right? I think that we just need to change our vernacular and stop labeling everything all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time.
Thank you.
Even in relationships, people are like, I'm in a toxic relationship. I'm like, no, you're not. You have two people who have not done the work, who are
Right.
looking for an escape to blame. Play victim games, you get victim
Well,
prizes.
thank you for saying that. I think that's helpful for everybody, that whole labeling thing we're doing.
Yeah. And so as a man, I think that, you know, for me, I think it's really about four things. I love that you asked me this question. Nobody asked me this question. There are four things that I believe are the cornerstone of man: courage, love, strength, and honor.
Yeah.
And those are the pillars in my life as a man. Like, you have to be courageous. Like, you've got to be able to speak your mind, tell your truth, show up and get it done. You've got to step into adversity. You've got to battle your demons. You got to battle the world most of the time, right? And you got to be courageous. Like, as a future father, because I plan on having children at some point in this journey, I don't want my children to think of me as a coward. That to me feels like the biggest dagger. Like, I don't know, keep that away from me, man. No, let's face the thing in front of us. Love. Like this, you got to have love in your life. You've got to open up your heart. You got to be willing to be vulnerable. You got to be willing to let your guard down. You got to be willing to connect with your woman or your partner, however you navigate the world. You've got to be willing to really receive also. So many guys give and they don't receive.
Yeah.
Like, and receiving is very uncomfortable for a lot of men. I include myself in this category. And so whenever it's in front of me, I always ask myself, what do I need in this moment to be able to have a woman be a nurturer or a caregiver, or
Yeah.
have my homie help me on a project, or have my team execute the game plan, right? And that all comes down to love for myself and love for other people.
Sure.
Strength. Strength is everything, man. You got to be strong. Weak people get run over. Like, that is the nature of the world. And I'm not saying be a chauvinistic asshole. Let's not misconstrue my words. I'm saying strength is about getting it done, is about pushing through, is about being resilient. You want to be great? You got to be strong, man. The world is hard. The world is hard. It does not owe you understanding. It does not owe you forgiveness. And in a blink of an eye, you're going to be 80 years old on your deathbed if you're lucky enough to make it that far. And if you live your whole life being weak and being fearful and not stepping into your truth, your power, your mission, your journey, you're in trouble. So strength is so important. And lastly is honor. Live an honorable life. Be a man of your word. Like, I wish we could go back to the world of a spit in the hand and the handshake. Word is bond. Where I come from too, Paul, if you don't keep your word, there's consequences. And we live in a world where people just have big ass mouths talking
Right.
shit all the time.
Right.
They don't follow through. And
Right.
so honor to me, because look, and this all comes from having been the opposite of all of this, by the way. This isn't me sitting down and coming up with a list of fucking buzzwords because I think they sound cool. This is my learned experience and my journey as a man. And so for me, honor at the end of the day is me looking at my life and taking a very hard assessment of, am I living in integrity? Because if I can't look in that mirror and know that I'm telling the truth, that I'm living joyfully, that I'm executing the game plan, and that I'm pushing myself, that I'm taking care of my woman, that I'm taking care of my business and my employees, that I'm taking care of my health, I'm taking care of my money, that's not honorable. It's not honorable to go and play video games all night. No, I mean, and I mean this. If your
Right.
life is not what you want it to be, there is no honor in playing video games all night and watching television and being stuck. If you're stuck and you're not making the money you want, you don't have the health that you want, you don't have the relationship that you want, you shouldn't even have a television in your house.
Yeah. You gotta get unstuck. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So I mean, I can go down a diatribe on that, but ultimately it's the four pillars: courage, love, strength, honor.
I appreciate you helping me with that as I try to understand it better and try to get out of the trap we set for ourselves. Well, this has really been an interesting conversation. Maybe went in different directions than I was thinking of originally, but I really appreciate the inspirations that you have. You can find Michael at thinkunbroken.com, and you have group coaching practice, personal or one-on-one coaching practice. There also is a free book that you offer at the website for people to download. What you just mentioned what that book is, since we didn't talk about it earlier.
Yeah, it's called Think Unbroken. It's my first book. I wrote it about 6 years ago. It's been a #1 bestseller. I've given away thousands of copies because my mission is to change the world, not make money. But if I can do both, I'll be happy.
Me too. Okay, great. Well, it's really been an interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining me. Again, I'm Paul Baines, GreatDad.com. I do run a 6-week program that helps you develop resilience, not in the face of the kind of challenges that Michael is talking about, but more the everyday just slings and arrows of what we go through. You know, the bad boss or the offhand comment and the way that a lot of people react, which is voices in their head saying how negative that is and how bad it feels. And they live lives of, some of us live lives of just living inside our heads with all these negative thoughts, and that will stop you from success no matter how you define that. You can find that information about that at GreatDad.com/PQ if you're interested. So again, thanks again, Michael. We'll take care.
Thanks, brother.